This was the sound of a generation. For millions of us, it was the soundtrack to our childhoods, our after-school routines, our sick days. Cartoon Network wasn't just another channel. It was a cultural force that defined an era. It was a declaration that cartoons weren't just for kids, but for everyone. It was bold, it was weird, it was endlessly creative, and for a good long while it felt completely unstoppable. So what happened? How did the network go from an untouchable, creative powerhouse to, well, this ghost of its former self, a shell echoing with past glories? The answer isn't as simple as the shows ended or we all grew up. The truth is a lot more complex, and frankly, a lot more cynical. It's a story of a slow, systemic dismantling. It's a story of disastrous business decisions, a catastrophic misunderstanding of its own audience, and a level of corporate greed so profound it chose to literally erase art for a tax break. This isn't just a story about a network that failed. It's a story about a network that was failed, piece by piece, by the very people in charge of protecting it. To really understand the fall, you have to appreciate the incredible height from which it tumbled. On October 1st, 1992, media mogul Ted Turner launched Cartoon Network. The concept was simple but revolutionary. A 24-hour channel dedicated entirely to animation. At first, it was basically a vault, a place to show off the massive Hanna-Barbera library that Turner had bought, giving a home to the Flintstones, the Jetsons, and Scooby-Doo. It was reliable, classic cartoon comfort food, but the real genius, the spark that would ignite a cultural firestorm, came a few years later with the What a Cartoon show. This wasn't just another program, it was an incubator. It was an animation laboratory where creators were given one simple instruction: make the cartoon you've always wanted to make. No executive meddling, no overbearing notes, just pure, unfiltered creativity. And from that experiment, a new universe was born. Genndy Tartakovsky gave us Dexter's Laboratory. Craig McCracken gave us the Powerpuff Girls. John R. Dilworth gave us Courage the Cowardly Dog. Danny Antonucci gave us Ed, E.T. and Eddie. This was the birth of the cartoon. Cartoons, a brand that became a seal of quality, promising something new and different. These shows didn't look or feel like anything else on TV, because they were driven by their creators. You could feel the unique personality of the artists in every single frame. They were quirky, sometimes subversive, and they always respected the intelligence of their audience. They didn't talk down to kids, and because of that, they captured the imagination of an entire generation. This was the golden age. The network was a kingmaker, a place where one 7-minute short could blossom into a global phenomenon. The iconic checkerboard branding was everywhere. The bumpers, the promos, the music, it all cultivated an identity that was just effortlessly cool. It felt like the cartoons themselves were running the channel. And even after that creative explosion, Cartoon Network proved it could do it all over again. The 2010s ushered in what many call the Renaissance era. Pendleton Ward's Adventure Time completely redefined long-form storytelling in kids. Animation J.G. Quintel's regular show perfectly captured the surreal vibe of post-college slacker life. Rebecca Sugar's Steven Universe broke new ground with its emotional depth, while Ben Boaklett's The Amazing World of Gumball was a masterclass in mixed-media comedy. These shows weren't just popular, they were critically acclaimed, winning Emmy and Peabody Awards and pushing the boundaries of what a cartoon could be. For over 2 decades, across 2 distinct golden ages, Cartoon Network was the undisputed champion of television animation. It felt like an unstoppable force, but behind the scenes the foundation was starting to crack. The first tremors of the earthquake that would eventually bring the whole structure down were being felt. And it all started when the network tried to be something it was not. In 2007, a new president named Stuart Snyder took over Cartoon Network. Snyder came from outside the world of animation, and when he looked at the TV landscape, he saw competitors like Disney Channel and Nickelodeon cleaning up with live-action sitcoms for tweens. Shows like Hannah Montana and iCarly were ratings juggernauts with huge merchandising potential. The business logic seemed simple. If live-action works for them, why not for us? And so began the great ill-fated experiment. CN Real. It was a programming block that fundamentally betrayed the channel's entire identity. The name of the network is Cartoon Network. That's not just a name, it's a promise. By bringing in live action, Snyder was watering down the very brand that made the channel a powerhouse. The block featured shows like Destroy, Build, Destroy, a reality show about blowing things up. Dude, what would happen? Where 3 teens did what-if experiments, and Bob says, a show that, well, it existed. The backlash from the core audience was immediate and ferocious. Viewers who tuned in for the creative, boundary-pushing animation they loved were instead served up low-budget reality shows that felt cheap and derivative. It felt like a corporate invasion, a soulless attempt to chase a trend instead of setting one. Online forums and the early days of social media lit up with outrage. This wasn't the Cartoon Network they grew up with. From a business perspective, the logic was flawed from the start. People watched Cartoon Network for the unique creator-driven animation they couldn't get anywhere else. By trying to copy its rivals, the network abandoned its greatest strength, its uniqueness. The CN Real era was a critical failure that alienated loyal fans without attracting the new audience it so desperately wanted. While the block was eventually phased out, the damage was done. It was the first big sign that the network's leadership was willing to sacrifice its creative soul for a ratings bump. It showed a deep misunderstanding of why people watched in the first place. It was the first crack in the dam, a warning that the priority was shifting from fostering creativity to chasing profits. And even though the network would rebound creatively with its Renaissance era, this mistake set a dangerous precedent. It opened the door for business decisions to override artistic identity, a problem that would only get worse as the incredible shows of the Renaissance era Adventure Time, regular show, Steven Universe began to wrap up. Cartoon Network faced a familiar question: what's next? They needed a new hit to anchor the schedule. Their solution would become one of the most divisive and damaging decisions in the network's history. That solution was Teen Titans Go. Now, to be clear, the problem wasn't the show itself. Teen Titans Go was a reboot of the beloved, more dramatic 2003 Teen Titans series. This new version was pure comedy, with a zany art style and a focus on gags instead of superhero drama. This definitely created friction with fans of the original, but the show found its own audience, especially with younger kids. It was cheap to make, the episodes were self-contained, and most importantly, it was a ratings hit. The problem wasn't that it existed. The problem was its total and complete dominance. The network, seeing a reliable ratings winner, started to lean on it. Then it started to depend on it. Then, it became an obsession. The Cartoon Network schedule, once a vibrant mix of diverse and interesting shows, became a monotonous flood of Teen Titans Go. There were entire days, sometimes entire weekends, where the channel would air nothing but back-to-back-to-back episodes. It was a programming strategy of brute force. This had a devastating ripple effect. New and emerging shows couldn't find an audience because they were barely even on the air. Promising series like OKKO, Let's Be Heroes, and Victor and Valentino were suffocated, given terrible time slots or buried in the schedule, making it impossible to build any momentum. Viewers who tuned in hoping for the variety that once defined Cartoon Network were met with the same show, over and over and over. This wasn't just a scheduling quirk. It was a total shift in philosophy. The old Cartoon Network was built on variety, on creating a block where one great show flowed into the next, keeping you glued to the screen. The new strategy was all about avoiding risk. They found one thing that worked, and they were going to milk it until it was dry, no matter the damage to the rest of their shows or the growing frustration of their fans. This oversaturation alienated a huge part of the audience. The community that grew up with the network felt abandoned. They watched the network trade its creative diversity for the cheap, easy ratings of a single, polarizing show. The constant reruns became a meme, a symbol of the network's decline. So while Teen Titans Go was a commercial success, the cost was the erosion of the brand's identity. The network that once championed bold, original voices was now defined by a single, repetitive echo. It was a tipping point from which the channel would never truly recover. If the CN Real era was a crack in the foundation and the Teen Titans Go marathon was a major fracture, the 2022 merger of Warner Media with Discovery Inc. was the demolition crew arriving on site. The creation of Warner Bros. Discovery, led by CEO David Zaslav, ushered in a new corporate philosophy focused on one single goal: cutting costs to pay down a mountain of debt, which at one point stood at a staggering $40 billion. In this new reality, art, legacy, and fan loyalty weren't assets. They were expenses on a spreadsheet, and Cartoon Network was directly in the crosshairs. The first major blow landed in October 2022, with the announcement that Cartoon Network Studios would be merged with Warner Bros. Animation. While the company insisted CNS would keep its unique identity, it was a clear signal of consolidation. The merger came with massive layoffs, with Warner Bros. Television Group cutting 26% of its workforce, hitting the animation division especially hard. The studio founded as an incubator for unique voices was now being absorbed into a larger corporate machine, its creative autonomy gone. To make matters worse, the company also shut down programs designed to train new and diverse writers and directors. The very pipelines that could have produced the next generation of creators were deliberately sealed off. But the most shocking and damaging move was still to come. It became known as the content purge. In a move that sent shockwaves through the industry, Warner Bros. Discovery began quietly pulling dozens of titles from its own streaming service, HBO Max. This wasn't just about licenses expiring. This was the deliberate removal of their own property, and animation was gutted. Critically acclaimed Cartoon Network shows like Infinity Train, OKKO, Let's Be Heroes, and Summer Camp Island vanished overnight. Some of these shows were Max originals, meaning the service was the only place they could ever be legally watched. Now, they were just gone. The reason for this cultural vandalism was purely financial. By removing these shows, the company could avoid paying residuals to the creators and crews who made them. Even more cynically, they could use the cancelled projects as tax write-offs, literally turning art into an accounting trick to save money. The message this sent was brutal and clear. Nothing is safe. The art you create, the shows you love, it's all completely disposable if it gets in the way of a corporate savings goal. Creators were devastated, watching years of their work erased without warning. Owen Dennis, the creator of Infinity Train, revealed that all references to his show were even scrubbed from Cartoon Network's website and social media, an attempt to make it seem like it never existed. This corporate strategy showed a complete contempt for animation and its audience. The leadership at Warner Bros. Discovery saw Cartoon Network not as a cultural institution to be nurtured, but as a collection of assets to be liquidated. The financial results tell the story in stark numbers. Annual ad revenue for Cartoon Network and Adult Swim plummeted by a staggering 80% in a decade, falling from $668.3 million in 2014 to just $133.7 million in 2024. The network was being systematically starved. This corporate dismantling is the single biggest reason for the channel's failure. It's a complex and, frankly, enraging story, and it's a pattern we're seeing across the entertainment industry. If deep dives like this are what you come to YouTube for, consider subscribing to the channel. Hitting that button really helps support this kind of analysis. And now, let me know in the comments. What show from the content purge hurt you the most? For me, it has to be Infinity Train. Now, let's get back to how this all led to the death of the channel itself. While the corporate decisions from Warner Bros. Discovery were the main cause of death, two powerful outside forces sped up the decline: the collapse of the traditional cable model and a catastrophically fumbled streaming strategy. Cartoon Network was caught in a pincer move. Its traditional audience was shrinking, and it completely failed to capture a new one online. First, let's talk about the death of cable TV. For decades, the cable bundle was the lifeblood of channels like Cartoon Network, but the rise of streaming led to cord cutting, a mass exodus of customers. Every year, millions of households cancel cable, which means the potential audience for any channel is constantly shrinking. This isn't unique to Cartoon Network. Nickelodeon and Disney Channel are facing the same problem as their young audience moves to YouTube and TikTok. The viewership numbers paint a grim picture. In 2020, Cartoon Network averaged a respectable 274,000 primetime viewers. By April 2025, that number had cratered to just 61,000. In July of 2024, the channel averaged only 74,000 viewers for an entire day, a shockingly low number for a brand that was once a household name. The situation got even worse in 2025 when Comcast, a huge cable provider, dropped Cartoon Network from its basic package, moving it to a more expensive add-on tier. This single move drastically reduced the channel's reach, putting another nail in the coffin. This is where a good streaming strategy becomes essential for survival. A strong presence on a service like Max should have been Cartoon Network's lifeboat. The channel had a deep beloved library of classics that could have made Max a must-have for families or any adult who grew up on Dexter's Lab or Adventure Time. Instead, Warner Bros. Discovery made a series of stunning mistakes. First, instead of making Max the definitive home for Cartoon Network, they scattered the library. They licensed some of their most iconic shows to their direct competitors. Want to watch The Amazing World of Gumball? You'd need Hulu. Curious about a new Steven Universe spin-off that's heading to Prime Video? This move made no sense. It was like a restaurant giving away its best recipes to the cafe across the street. Second, they just failed to make Max a destination for young viewers. Polling data showed Max getting crushed by the competition. Among 10 to 12-year-olds, only 13% reported watching content on Max, compared to 32% for Hulu, 57% for Disney+, and a dominant 72% for Netflix. The platform that should have inherited the Cartoon Network legacy was failing to capture the next generation, and the content purge was the final, fatal blow. How can you market your service as a home for family entertainment when you've shown you're willing to delete children's shows for a tax break? It destroyed trust with parents and fans. Why would anyone invest in a platform that treats its library as disposable? In late 2024, the company shut down the official Cartoon Network website, redirecting all traffic to the main Max page, a final symbolic act of erasure. Cartoon Network was trapped, its cable audience was evaporating, and the streaming service that was supposed to be its future was being actively sabotaged by its own parent company. It was a failure on all fronts, leaving the brand stranded with no clear path forward. So, how did Cartoon Network fail? The answer is as clear as it is tragic. It didn't just wither away. It was systematically dismantled by a series of devastatingly poor decisions. It started with an identity crisis, believing it needed to abandon its animated soul to chase trends. It was then weakened by creative cowardice, an over-reliance on a single, safe show that suffocated the variety that once made it special. But the final blows were delivered by pure corporate greed. A new parent company, burdened by debt and led by executives with no apparent respect for animation, saw Cartoon Network not as a cultural treasure, but as an asset to be stripped for parts. They consolidated its studio, fired its talent, and shut down the pipelines for new voices. They erased entire shows from existence for a tax write-off, a move of such profound cynicism it will stain the company's legacy forever. They fumbled their streaming strategy so badly they licensed their crown jewels to the competition. What we're left with today is a ghost, a phantom channel haunting the upper tiers of a dwindling cable landscape, with new shows becoming an endangered species, a brand name that's now little more than a content label, its creative engine hollowed out. The iconic Cartoon Network Studios building in Burbank was closed down, a literal and symbolic end of an era, and now even that is being broken apart. Recent plans from Warner Bros. Discovery aim to split the company, putting the Cartoon Network channel on one side of the business, and the animation studios that actually make the content on the other. They are finalizing the divorce between the brand and the creativity that gave it life. The real tragedy is that this was not inevitable. It was a choice, a series of choices, made in boardrooms, by people who saw more value in a short-term stock bump than in a long-term cultural legacy. The shows, of course, will live on in our memories, on old DVDs, and scattered across whatever streaming service has the rights this week. But the institution that created them, the cultural force that gave so many brilliant artists a platform and defined childhood for millions, is gone. It was an unstoppable force in animation that was stopped, deliberately, by the unstoppable force of corporate greed, and we're all just left wandering the ruins, wondering how it all went so wrong.